Tov, today's daf yomi is Sanhedrin daf mem ches, Sanhedrin 48, and today's daf is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, that's all for the Shuyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this Eis Tzara. We're going to start on the bottom of 47b, where the Gemara asks the question, and the question has to do with whether you have some in mind to use something for something else, but you haven't yet used it. It's just the fact that in your mind you're prepared to use it for this item. Does that make it prohibited if that item is wanted to have been used, would be prohibited to have benefit from it? So the Gemara 10 lines from the bottom says, Idmar oreg beged lamei. So somebody weaves a garment for a dead body after the person is already dead, Rashi points out. So then Abaye, but you haven't yet used it on the dead body. So Abaye says, under those circumstances, asur, that you're no longer allowed to have benefit from it. And Rava Amar Mutter, Rava says it is permitted. And this is not one of the 6 cases of Yalkagam, so we're going to, in the end, rule like Rava. But the Gemara is going to discuss this for a page or so. So Abaye Amar asur, Abaye says it's prohibited because Hazmana Milsahi. The fact that you prepared it for that item, that it is enough to say as though you wove it, as though you wrapped him in it, and so therefore it's prohibited. Rava Amar Mutter, Rava says it's permitted. Hazman alav milsi. The fact that you designated in your mind for it is not sufficient to make it prohibited for benefit. Right time is Abaye. What's the reasoning for Abaye? Kamar sham me'egla arufa. So we know that it says by Miriam that she was buried there, and the same word there, sham, appears by the egla rufa, the calf that's killed because after you find an anonymous dead body. So ma egla rufa ba'azmana mitzvah, just like the calf, once you start taking it down to the nachal, it becomes prohibited, even before it's killed. So too, ainami ba'azmana mitzvah. So too here also, once you designate the shroud for the dead body, it's going to be prohibited. Rava Gamar Sham me'avodas kochavim, and Rava takes this word Sham and he compares it from Miriam to idolatry. Me'avodas kochavim b'hazmana lo mitzvah. Just like by idolatry, when it comes to hazmana, when it comes to preparing it, it's not going to be prohibited. Meaning to say that it's only prohibited once it's actually worshipped. If a person had said, this house will be for idolatry, or this ox will be for idolatry, it's going to be permitted. We learned that in the Mesechas Avodah Zarah, because there's no hektish, there's no sanctification for idolatry. So too in the case of these weaving a garment for a dead body, b'azmana or mitzvah, with hazmana, it's not prohibited. So Rava, my time will gamar me'egla rufa. Why doesn't Rava learn it out from this calf, the egla rufa? Amrocha. So Rava would say to you, on the top of 48a, Mishamshin mi Mishamshin Gamrinan, Afuke Egla Arufa Dihi Gufa Kedusha. He said, no, we're going to learn out from the shrouds for the dead body to something that was used for idolatry, because they're both accessories to the actual prohibition. Whereas the Egla Arufa, it itself is a sanctified item, so it's not a direct comparison. Abaye, my time will govern. And why did Abaye not derive it from idolatry? Amar, because Abaye would say, Mide de orche, mide de orche gamrinan. So he says we're going to learn out preparing the shrouds to the Egla Rufa, because these are both things that it's appropriate for the Jews to do. You're supposed to do the mitzvah of Egla Rufa if you're in that Rahman al-Tzon situation, and also the shrouds if you're in that Rahman al-Tzon situation. Idolatry is not something, it's a sin. And so therefore, we're not going to compare it to idolatry. Rashi gives a second explanation. I just said his first explanation outside, but Rashi gives a second explanation that by idolatry, you might do tshuva and not end up using it. And so you can't compare it to the case of the shrouds, where it's not a question of doing tshuva. So siman kipa nafshe dechatziva nechisa deumna. So the Gemara is going to try and prove from several sources who the halacha is like. So we say meisvei kipa shu tame midrash v'nasnu le sefer tar min midrash aval tame Maga Midras. Okay, we have to do a little bit of a background. This is a Mishnah from Kalim. And so the concept is as follows: that if a zav reclines on something or leans on something, so then it's the item he leans on is what's called tamei midrash. There are four people who can make tamei midrash: zav, zava, yoledes, and mitzora. So we say that under these circumstances, under these circumstances, the item that they have reclined on is going to itself become the same level of tumah as the zav, and they become an ava tumah. But that's only if the item itself was meant to be reclined on. But if it was not meant to be reclined on, then it becomes a rishon tumah, not an ava tumah. So the question that the Gemara is raising from the Mishnah is: let's say you have a cloth which somebody had leaned on, it became tamei midrash, a zav had leaned on, but then the person gave it over to a Sefer Torah to wrap it. So under those circumstances, even without going in the mikvah, it's tar min midrash. It's no longer able to be. It's now just a rishon. It's no longer the avatuma, because once it's the Sefer Torah, you can't recline on it. So it's no longer an avatuma. So it's avatame magim midrash. Avatame magim midrash. So it's a rishon latuma. And so we see from here. Anyway, we see from here that it's tar min midrash. Rashi says ba'azmana ba'alma, just by saying and designating that it's for Torah, it already becomes purified from an avatuma and is now just a rishon tuma. We see from here that this is a proof for Abai, who says Azmana is milsi. That's how Rashi learns it. And the Gemara says no, ema nisanaso karachto. So no, we're talking about a case where it was actually wrapped around the Torah, and that's why it's no longer avatuma. The Gemara says, well, lamali nisanaso, lamali ema nisanaso karachto. So you actually gave it over and wrapped it. So the Gemara says, why do you need both of them? If you had just wrapped it, it would be itself become prohibited for anah, even though you didn't designate it. So the Gemara says, no, Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda, I sudra de izmane lameitzer beit tefillin. Let's say you have a bag which you had designated to put tefillin in, mitzar beit tefillin, and then you had put the tefillin in it, also meitzer b'pshite. Then you're no longer allowed to put coins in it. But azmane, but you prepared it v'otzarbe, and you didn't put the coins in it, or tzarbe v'azmane, shar meitzer b'pshite. You need both according to Rav Chisda. You need to have it designated and also to actually have carried the coin, the tefillin in order for it to be prohibited for the coins. Gemara says, and according to Abai, it says just the designation itself is enough, and wouldn't have to actually put the coins in. So that it would be enough for it to be prohibited for tefillin as long as you designate it, even though you didn't put the coins in it. And sarbe, and if you put the coins in it, if you put the coins in it, then it's only prohibited if you designated it, but if you didn't designate it, low. So Abaye is not in agreement with Rav Chisda. So then the Gemara says, another attempt. Tashma nefesh shabano l'shem chai. So what is this nefesh that you built for? This is where Rashi says it's a building over a grave that you built for a person while he's alive, and when he's going to die, he'll be buried in this building. Mutar bano, you're allowed to have benefit from it. Hosif bodimos echad l'shem meis, but if you put into it one row for a deceased person, you put a row of stones for a deceased person, then asar ba'ana. So this is going to be a question on Rava, because we see from here just the fact that you put it in even before it was used is prohibited. So as mana milsei. So the Gemara says no. Alchamayaskinan the Rama Bay Mace. No, here what we're talking about is actually that you put a dead body into this grave, and so therefore it's not hasmana. its actual use. So the Gemara says, then why do you need to have added a row? Even if you didn't add the row, if you put the dead body in there, it would be prohibited. The Gemara says, no, it's telling us, even though you remove the dead body from there, it remains prohibited and benefit. Since you built, since it was built after he died, but the building that was built while he was alive is not going to be prohibited, because since it took place while he was alive, it's not prohibited. And the burial that took place afterwards doesn't prohibit it, because it's like you put the coins in there without any designation. And Amar Rafam Bar Papa Amar Rav Chisda ben Makiro Cholzo Mutar. And Rav Chisda said that which we said, that if you added on another row, everything becomes prohibited. But if you recognize what he added and he removed it, it's going to be permitted. So Gemara again attempts to challenge Rav, who says Hazmana is lav milsehi. Hachotzev kever lav, if a person hews out a grave for his father, and then he goes buries him somewhere else, he can never bury anybody else in that grave. So we see Hazman is milsi. It's a question on Rava. So the Gemara says no, hasam mishum kavod of it. There, it's only because of the designation, the honor of his father. And indeed this is logical. Indeed this is logical. The Katani Seifa, because it says in the conclusion, from Shimon Gamliel Omer, covered by an alamis. Shimon Gamliel says in the next clause, even somebody who hews out stones for his father and goes and buries him in another place, he's never allowed to bury in that grave. Now, if you want to say that it's because of the honor for his father, it makes sense. If you want to say it's just the preparation, and Azman is milse, tavi la'ariga miika. Nobody says just spinning the wool without weaving it into a garment is enough to make it prohibited. So therefore, clearly, this case is because of special circumstances of the honor for his father. Tashma, another attempt, but this time it's on Abaye. Abaye says Azman is milse, so we say kever chadash mutar ba'ana. If you have a new grave, you're allowed to have benefit from it. Hitel bo nefel, but let's say you put a aborted fetus in it. Also, you're not allowed to have benefit from this new grave, which means to say hitel in lo hitel lo. That when does the grave become prohibited? Only once the fetus is in it. So there's a question on the Abaye who says Azman milse. So the Gemara says no. Even though you didn't throw the fetus in, the grave will be prohibited. It's just coming to exclude the position of Rav Shimon Gamliel, who says that the fetus only has its exact space, but not the area around it. So Rav Shimon Gamliel says that fetuses don't have the tfisas of the kever, so we're saying it does, and even before it was put in. Tashma, another attempt to challenge Abaye, who says Hazman is milsa. The Gemara says Mosar Amesim Amesim. A person's collecting charity for dead bodies in general. The extra money will go to the dead. Mosar Ames or Yorshav. If you're collecting for a specific dead body, that goes to the heirs. So we see from here, from the fact that it says Mosar Ames Yorshav, the heirs can get benefit from it. So Rashi says this proves that Azmana is not a milta because otherwise it would have to be used directly for the dead body itself. But in this case, we're going to allow the heirs to get benefit. So in verse no, you collected it while he was still alive, and so therefore it's not preparation for the dead, and so therefore they could have benefit from it. But Gemara says, "Hello, Tami Yachi." But didn't we not learn this? And didn't we learn that now we learned in the Mishnah in Shkol, Mosar Mesim Amesim, the leftover that you collect for the dead goes to the dead. Mosar Ames Liyorshav Vitani Allah. And when we said there that the extra dead goes to the heirs, we learned Ketzad Gavel Amesim Stam. If you collected it for the dead without any specifications, Zel Mosar Amesim Amesim Gavel Amesa, you collected for this dead body, Zel Mosar Ames Liyorshav. So we see specifically collected for a dead body, and his heirs can use it. So this is therefore a question on Abaye. Gemara says, "Well, Tamecha must seifa," but according to your logic, Rameh or Omer, or Yiga ben Achi Yavu Elio. According to your logic, we see different opinions. Rameh says you can't touch it until Elio comes. Rabbi Notz and Omer Yah said, "Dimos al kivro." Oh, zila fufnei mitas. Rabbi Notz says use it as like to make his grave nicer by either building something or pouring some like fragrance wine around it. So we see from here that that which you collected for the dead body is prohibited. So the Gemara says, "Ela Abaye mitaratz l'tamei v'Rava mitaratz l'tamei." But the Abaye and Rava would explain the whole Mishnah according to their opinion. Abaye who says Azman is Milsei, mitaratz l'tamei. The Kuli Alma, everybody says Azman is Milsei. Everybody says that just the preparation is enough. Tanakama Savar, the Tanakama is in the position the Chazi le Tafis, the Chazi le Tafis, the dead body will grab whatever is Chazi for it, meaning to say that everything that is appropriate for the dead will become prohibited to have benefit. With that which was not, will not. Rameir misafka itafes ilo tafes. Rameir is not sure. He says, don't touch it. He says, it's obvious to me that it's certainly that he certainly was tofes it. And so therefore, therefore you have to use it to make the grave itself nicer. Rabba follows his logic that Rabba says the everybody says not a preparation. Tanakama savar kibazu mechel. The Tanakama is of the position that kibazu mechel zelusein gabe yorshin. And even when you desecrate him after his death, he's going to waive his honor for the needs of the heirs. And so therefore, the extra money could go to the heirs. Rabbi Meir is not sure if he would waive it. And therefore can't touch it. Rabbi Natan was obvious to him that he wouldn't waive it. So therefore, you have to use it specifically for the dead body. Tashma, Gemara again challenges the body. It's a terrible situation. Let's say the father and the mother, they lost the child, and they're in such terrible grief that they're throwing all the clothing of the child onto the coffin, onto the grave, in order to make it prohibited to them. Mitzvah al-khair ma'atzion. So then it's a mitzvah on others who see this to save the garments and to remove them, so that they don't become prohibited to have benefit from. So Rashi says there's no Hashavas Aveda greater than this. There's no returning of the lost objects. Meaning to say that they're not prohibited even though they designate it for the dead body. So therefore, this is a question on Abaye. So the Gemara says, no, 48b, therefore, because they were in such distress, they didn't designate it. So it was no hazmana. Well, that which was stated upon an Amar when it didn't actually touch the coffin, then you could do it. But if it touched it, it's prohibited. But if they and if the reason is that it's not prohibited is because they only threw it out of their pain, why, when it touches the dead body, is it prohibited? There's no hazmana here. So the Gemara says, Tirgama. Ula explained it, but mita nekparasimo. No, we're talking about a case that the mechalfi b'tachrichi ames. Now we're talking about a case it touched the bed that he was on that was actually buried with the dead body, and we're concerned that these garments will be mixed up with the shrouds of the dead body, and so therefore that's why it's a rabbinic prohibition that's prohibited. Gemara again challenges Rava, who says it's manolav milsi, because it says tashma kisha asu laniach bo tefillin. Let's say you have a bag to put tefillin in. Asr laniach bamos. You're not going to be allowed to put the money into it. Hiniach bo tefillin, but if you put tefillin in it, yaniach bo mos. So if you have a bag that you made for tefillin, you can't put money in it. But even if you put Hold on, let me just read this again. Kisha also aniach bo tefillin. Once you have a bag that you made for tefillin, once you make the tefillin bag, Also, you can't put the money in. It's a question on Rava because it's the Hazmana. But let's say you made the bag not for tefillin, but if you didn't make it for tefillin, once you make the tefillin, even if you put the tefillin in, you could still put the money. So the question on Rava. So Gemara says, Ema also v'iniach b'tefillin. No, read it. If you made it and you put the tefillin in, also niach b'mos, like Rav Chisda said, and only if you did both is it prohibited. Tashma Amar Uman Atali Tik Shel Sefer or Nartik Shel Tefillin. Another attempt. Let's say you say to the craftsman, make me a bag for a Torah scroll or a bag for tefillin. Atzon Ishtamish Ben Kodesh until you use them for something sacred. Mutar Ishtamish Ben Chol. You can use it for something that's not sacred. Nishtamish Ben Kodesh also Ishtamish Ben Chol. But once you use it for something sacred, you can't use it for something chol. The direct question on Abaye. So the Gemara says tonight, okay, we're going to conclude that it's a machokas tanoim, the Tanya, Sipon Zav. Let's say you take tefillin and you cover them with batim of gold, or or you made a cover for them out of non-kosher animal skin. Psulas, they're disqualified. Or behemoth tahora shares, but if they're made out of kosher skin, it's kosher. Even though you didn't designate them when you tanned it, when you cured the hide, you didn't make it for the purpose, because he says azmana is not it doesn't matter, and so therefore it's not essential. So we see azmana is lav milsa, where that's like Rava. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says. No, the animal, the hide needs to be made with shema. So he says, Hazmana is milsa. So he said, we're arguing about whether or not if you just prepared the garment for the dead body, it's prohibited. But is it really possible to have such a scenario that a dead body somebody will die, and then right away you sit down to weave the garment? It's going to take too long. Amarle, no, Rabbi said yes. You go in shachbe de harpanai. That's what happens in Harpanya, that they're poor, and only after they die do they collect the money to prepare the burial. Darish by Memer Hilchos HaKavasa de Abaye, Rabbanan Amar Hilchos HaKavasa de Rabba, Hilchos HaKavasa de Rabba, we paskin like Rabba, Azmana Lav Milsi. Tana Rabbana, and so the rabbis taught, so now that earlier we had said, 46a, that those who are killed by the court, they have executed by the court, they have a different law from all the other people who are executed, that you don't mourn for people who are executed by the court, and you don't bury them in the graves of their fathers. Gemara brings a brisa that clarifies their laws with respect to inheritance. So Haruge Malchus, says the brisa, if somebody was executed by the court, by the king, then the king gets his assets. Haruge Bezdin, if somebody was executed by the court, then the heirs are going to get their assets. So if somebody is executed by the king gets his assets. If he's executed by the court, the heirs get his assets. Rabbi Yehuda says, Af Haruge Malchus Nechsen Yorshin. Yehuda argues with Tanna Kamma, says, even if you're executed by the king, the heirs get your assets. Amrulay. How could Rabbi Yehuda say that if you're executed by the king, your heirs get your assets? What about the case of Yeravam ben Navot that Achav killed at Yeravam, and so even though, there was Navot, and Achav was the king, and he was wicked, and he worshipped idolatry, and Navot HaYisraeli had a vineyard, and Achav desired this vineyard, and so he wanted Navot to sell it to him, but Navot refused, and Achav was very upset, and his wife Izebel convinced him to convince everybody that Navot HaYisraeli was rebelling against the king, and Achav was able to get the vineyard. So if it doesn't disprove that that one who rebels against the king inherits it, and not the heirs. It's a question on Rabbi Yehuda. So so Amrolan, Rabbi Yehuda would respond to that. Ben Achi Aviv, no, that actually Achav was the relative of Navot. He was his first cousin. Veroy Yarshalaya. He was supposed to inherit him. Gemara says Valol Harbe Banim Ayulu, but Navot had many children. Amrlan Osovias Banav Haran. No, Achav killed everyone. As it states, Imlo as the main Navos as the main Banav Raisi. The Rabbanon, Au Rabbanim Aruyim, let's say Mimenu. No. The Rabbanim, how would they explain this pasuk that he killed him and his children? It doesn't mean he killed him and his children, but rather he says you killed all his future children, all the descendants who are going to come out from Navot. It's like you killed them. Bishlam Manda Amar Nefsei makes sense according to the Tanakh who says that the king gets the asset. Hainu Dachsev. That's why it says in Tehillim, Beirach Navot Elokim Vamelach. That's why the charge against him. They had the witnesses say that that Navot cursed God and the king, because this way the king gets the vineyard. According to one who says that the heirs get it, why do we have to say that he defamed the king? What's the difference? The assets go to the heirs. But according to your logic, why do you have to say that he cursed God? It was the propaganda. They wanted to get everybody upset. It makes sense according to one who says, Rabbi, according to the Tanakh says the king gets the assets. This has a circumstance where Shlomo Melech was trying to kill Yoav because Yoav had killed many people, and David said he had to go. So Yoav ran to the tent of God. He says, I'm not going to leave because I'm going to die here. He didn't want to be judged by Shlomo Melech because he rebelled, because he didn't want Shlomo Melech to get his assets. And so he wanted to be judged by the Sanhedrin. And so therefore this works according to the position of the Tanakh. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, who said that the heirs would get the assets regardless, what does he care who he was judged by? So Gemara says, no, he wanted to live an extra moment. He was delaying the process. So now, since we discussed this incident of Yoav and Binyahu who went to get him, and Shlomo HaMelech, the Gemara is going to bring clarify the moment. But it says, "Vayashav Binyahu HaMelech davar le'mor kodiber Yoav v'chohanani." So Binyahu brought the matter back to the king. He says, "This is what he said, and this is what I answer me." Means to say that Yoav said a lot of things, but at the beginning of the pasuk, he just says that he'd rather die next to the altar. Amrway Zil Aimaway, go and say to Shlomo Melech Tarti. Go and say two things. First of all, don't do these two things to me. If you want to kill me, then accept upon yourself the curses that David your father cursed me after I killed this Avner. But if you don't want to accept upon yourself these curses, just leave me, then I'll stand with the curses of your father and don't kill me. We say, if you kill me, you're going to get the curses. If you don't kill me, then I'll get the curses. And so Shlomo said, I'll accept the curses that David cursed, that my father David cursed Yoav. I'm Rabbi Marav, Kol Shakil David as Yoav. So I'm Rabbi Marav, Kol Shakil David as Yoav, Niskaimu Bezara Shal David. So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav, all the curses that David cursed Yoav were fulfilled in the descendants of David. He says, Al Yikareis mi Beitz Yoav, Zavu Mitzoro, Machazik Bepelach, V'nofel B'charev Chaser Lachem. That David cursed Yoav, that from his household there will always be a Zav, a Mitzora, somebody who needs a stick to walk, and somebody who falls by the sword, and somebody who doesn't have bread. And how is this fulfilled? Zav, Rechavam. This was Shlomo's son. Rechavam became a Zav. And it's that when he saw the Jewish people were following him, they stoned him when he went to get taxes. And so we have the same idea of Merkav, and so therefore we assume he was a Zav. Mitzora me Uziyahu, because Uziyahu, a descendant of David, became a Mitzor. Dachsev ulchaska so gavali bo adu hashchitz vayimal b'Hashem elav vayavo alech al Hashem la'aptiras mizbach ha'ketoras uksiv atzaraz zarcha b'mitzvah. And how do we know malchazik b'pelach? How do they need a stick? Me'atza dachsev rak ha'etzik nafel chala etz raglav v'amar Rav Yehuda Marav also pudagra, that he got gout. And so Asa, the son of the son of David, got gout. And I'm really Marzucha Breder Rav Nachman. What is this illness? The pudagra, Amrway, kemachat babesrachai. It's like a needle in raw skin. Menayada, how do you know? Iba Yisema mechashav, but he himself got this gout. Iba Yisema marbe ave gamrway. He had a tradition. Iba Yisema soda shemu reyav ubriso leodiav. That he get insight from God. No fel b'acharav. That it'll be fallen by the sword. This is Yoshio. They'll say vayoru ayoram melch Yoshio. After Yoshio did not listen to Jeremiah, he was shot up by the to Isaiah. He was shot up by the archers. Amar Yehuda Amar Rav, and Rav Yehuda Amar Rav said, also called Gufa Kikiver. His whole body was made like a sin. That they're lacking bread. He was always given bread every day of his life. And he didn't have his own bread. He was a beggar. So the Jewish people ended the end of Malachim. They end with the Jewish people begging, the king of Israel begging for bread. I'm Rav Yehuda Marav. This is what people say. Hey, Luta, be the one who's cursed. Don't be the cursor. Don't be the cursor. Well, we'll stop here. Today's Daf Yomi Shikoyach.